This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hey, this is Drew from Humans of Gaming. I am also from Love Thy Nerd. I'm the chief content nerd at Love Thy Nerd, and this is the Humans of Gaming podcast. I nailed that intro. I'm joined with Chris Qualdney. Hey, Chris.
Hey, I am Chris, as Drew said.
And you're a year older.
I am a year older. I just had a birthday. Had a whirlwind of a birthday weekend. Yeah, thanks. My wife surprised me by paying for one of my friends to fly out here to play games with me so she didn't have to. Because she's not like super into games. I mean, she likes like party game kind of stuff, which I'm just
right. I played Secret Hitler with her before.
Yeah, she's a good liar.
And you were there. It wasn't just me and her.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, she paid someone to play games with me. Basically.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I have a new life goal, and that's to get Ashley to pay for me to come play games with you.
Yeah, someday.
I'm coming for you, Ryan.
We'll see.
I'm coming for that. The problem is that Ryan, I think, just has. It's a losing. I don't think I'll ever get there because Ryan doesn't have kids, and so
right.
He's gonna play more games online with you and that kind of thing, and just.
We've been playing. Him and I have been playing through like a bunch of the Souls games. So like we played Dark Souls 2. We just finished Bloodborne. We're kind of taking a break now, doing like Borderlands 2, just like a little palate cleanser. Okay. It's funny because like he's not really played it before. I've played it before, but like the first time he died. Again, we're coming from like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, okay, where death is a constant and also really devastating. And so he died in Bloodborne, or he died in Borderlands, and like you just get to respawn, and he's like, "That's it? Like there's no like penalty. There's nothing bad." And I'm like, "Dude, this is
that's how most games work,
yeah, right?
These days,
exactly.
That's funny. Did he like Bloodborne?
Oh, he's played those before.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
we'd both played those before.
Okay, nice. Well. Man, I'd love to play Bloodborne again all the way with people.
Well, you need to play
fun.
Sekiro now. I'm actually playing Sekiro right now, and it is so good. Oh,
really?
It's so good.
It feels intimidating to me because it doesn't have that leveling system, right?
It's not the same. It's different. So, okay, let me give you a little. We are actually going to talk to our guest, but you brought up this stuff, so.
Joe, do you play video games at all?
I do play video games, yes. I'm definitely
Have you played
into first-person shooters.
Okay, nice. So you haven't played the Souls games?
I have not.
Well,
have you played Borderlands?
No, I haven't played Borderlands either. I'm a little behind on video games. I've been busy with board gaming, so.
Yeah. You've been making a board game, which doesn't take any time at all, really.
No.
It's just super easy. No, I'm kidding. Sorry, Chris. Go ahead and finish. Then we'll get into talking to Joe.
So I've had this thought about Sekiro, and because it seems to be a little bit polarizing. Like it's getting really good reviews, like from major outlets and stuff. But like from some of the diehard fans, it's like it's so different that people are just like, oh, this isn't a Souls game, or this isn't a From Software or whatever. But like. I kind of had this thought where I'm a big Mumford & Sons fan. And so we're going a little music nerd here just a little bit. And like, Mumford came out with their first 2 albums and they like basically created a genre of music.
Right.
And, with those first 2 albums, like this folksy kind of rock, you're just really unique. Not that folk didn't exist before, but like they just did something different and created this kind of little niche genre. And, then all the imitators came after. And they were good. Like there was some of them that were like good, but nobody was Mumford, like they were the ones. And then their third album came out and it was so different. Like it was not this folky banjo kick drum kind of jam. It was just really different, but it still had that kind of that Mumford feel. And then their fourth album just came out like a few months ago or something. And again, another departure. Like it's still them, but it's not. And that to me is what From Software has done. Like they made Dark Souls. They literally created a genre of game. And they had all the imitators coming afterwards, you know, Lords of the Fallen and Salt and Sanctuary and Dead Cells and what's that other one? The Surge, like all these other imitators.
It's like samurai kind of, or
Neo. Yep, Neo. Yeah. And then, you know, Bloodborne, like they departed a little bit from the formula, but it's like still the same, you know, it's still got that same soul. Right. And then, dude, Sekiro comes on the scene and it's like super different, but it's just enough the same that it is like, it's really good. So I'm super into it.
And I think people need to remember, like, From Software has a long history of making games. Like, they did the Armored Core games and, like, Kingsfield, and so it's not like they've only ever made Souls, like, quote-unquote Souls games.
Yeah.
So.
But it's, like, after playing through these again with Ryan, well, I had previously only played, like, Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, and then with Ryan, like, I played Dark Souls 2 and now Sekiro. I'll eventually go back for, like, Dark Souls 1. Dude, it's like it's one of my favorite series of all time at this point. It's yeah.
So Joe, you should, if once you finish a board game and you have some time to kill, you should try Dark Souls.
I went on a tirade. He brought it up. No, that's
good. I like having recommendations for games that I need to play. Dark Souls, got it.
It'll be hard and frustrating for a while, but if you'll push through it, it's
worth
it. Really just wonderfully designed games. Just very thoughtfully designed. Anyway, so Joe, you've got a board game that you're working on. That's on Kickstarter.
That's right. I've been working on a game called Endangered, and yes, it's on Kickstarter now. It's on Kickstarter until April 26th.
And your last name is Hopkins. Sorry, I don't know if I introduced you.
Oh yeah,
fully.
Joe Hopkins. Yes.
And where are you from?
I'm from Michigan. I live in the Detroit area. I grew up in a tiny little farm community. My dad was actually a dairy farmer, and now I'm moved over to the big city over in Detroit.
So have you always been playing board games?
No.
Is that your background?
When I was in college, I was mostly into video games. When I was younger, I played a ton of board games with my brothers and sisters. I got into video games around the time of high school and college, and then after that, my friends and we bought a copy of Agricola and got me really big into modern board gaming.
How did you land with Agricola? Who did somebody? This is sort of like a classic that a lot of people really love, but I feel like most of us grew up with board games, or I think a lot of people say oh yeah, I grew up with board games, but what they mean is that Monopoly growing up, which no shame, right?
No,
I know,
Risk.
Some people hate it or whatever, but yeah, Monopoly, Risk, Battleship. I grew up with those games.
Oh, me too.
But I don't. But I don't know that I liked them a lot. But Agricola, that's serious. That's people who are really into games often will cite that one as sort of one of the first games they played.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious how you get into. But it's that's for people who are hobbyists for sure. So how did you get into that?
Yeah, so like I said, one of my friends suggested we buy this game. So he'd heard about it. I'm not sure where, but it was a $70 board game, which is super expensive. So we all chipped in.
Yeah.
So I co-owned Agricola. I didn't just own it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you had a share.
Yeah, I had a share of the
a 30%, 25% share. How much did you buy into Agricola?
Yeah, I had it on Mondays and Tuesdays.
That's right. Shared custody.
That's great.
So yeah, we bought that game and I really loved it. And started getting into some of these other modern games, but I was like, that was $70. That's way too expensive. I could just design a board game myself. And we could play it. So that's how I got into board game design.
That's cool. So it was so you've designed some other games previous to Endangered.
Yeah, so I've been designing board games for 10 years now. Endangered will be my first published game, and that one's on Kickstarter now. I have another game that's signed with a publisher called Pew Pew, and
I like it.
it's it's signed with Academy Games, and it's a dexterity game, and that's going to be coming out later this year as well.
Okay,
Is it
nice.
just like you have to do finger guns at people, and whoever does the best finger guns?
No, but there's all kinds of crazy flicking mechanisms. It's very different from Endangered.
Yeah.
Endangered is a dice placement, worker placement, cooperative game. Pew Pew's dexterity competitive, so it's very different.
Yeah.
Do you have to say pew pew when you flick things?
Yeah, that's a rule. You have it makes it more fun. No.
I feel like you should incorporate.
That'll
that
be a
somehow.
house rule for me.
Okay, so tell us about Endangered. You gave us a little bit, but what makes you unique?
Absolutely. So, Endangered is a cooperative game where the players play as conservationists trying to save a species from extinction. So, the core game is going to have two scenarios. It's going to have the tiger scenario and the sea otters. And then we have some stretch goals for the panda scenarios and the sea turtles. So, we got a lot of really cool stretch goals I'm hoping we reach. But it's a dice placement game. So what you do is you roll your dice and then you place your dice on the actions, just like a worker placement game. And they let you do lots of different things, like move the animals and clean up the deforestation and stuff. But what's unique about that is in a normal worker placement game, once you place your worker, no one else can use that action. It's blocked.
Sure.
But in this game, you can have multiple people use the same action. It's just that when you place your dice, they have to be bigger than the dice that are already there. So you're kind of getting in each other's way, and you don't want to. So in a normal competitive worker placement game, it's good to block people. But in this one, it's cooperative.
Right.
So you want to make sure everybody can use those
I don't know if
actions.
I've played a cooperative worker placement or dice placement.
Yeah, I pretty much said, I want to do a cooperative game. What mechanics do I like? And I like dice placement, worker placement. So I was like, do cooperative worker placement.
So how would you explain? Because I'm sure there's people listening and they're like, well, I have no idea what worker placement is, so they just spaced out.
Oh, sure.
Give them a rundown.
Yeah. So on the board there will be lots of different actions, lots of different things that you can do. You can do all kinds of different things. But in order to do any of them, you have to put one of your dice onto that card. And by doing that, it might block the other players from being allowed to use that action, to use that ability. So you go from a pool of lots of different things that you can do, but as people are blocking you, you have less options. So in a normal competitive worker placement game like Agricola, you want to build your farm, you build your house, you put your worker on there, and now you build your house and no one else can do it.
Yeah.
Which is good for you. But in this game, you are trying to help each other. So you have to cooperate to make sure, do you need to do this? Is it okay if I block this action? So it generates a lot of really interesting discussion, a lot of really good,
lively discussion,
family.
I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We probably have a few people that haven't played cooperative board games either.
Sure.
So what you mean by that, or I guess maybe we should say what that means in this game. So you're as a group, you're all playing together against the board.
That's right, and that means that you all win or you all lose.
Right. And who is the board in this case? Like, who are you fighting against to win or whatever?
So in the tiger scenario, during the game, there will be different impact cards that come out, and those represent the human impact on the environment. So those will be things like poachers, deforestation, problems that these species actually face in the real world. On the sea otter scenario, it's an oil spill, and it moves towards your animals, and you have to keep cleaning that and keep that from touching your animals.
So did you do some research and stuff, I assume, for the
theming?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on the different threats that these species faced. So there are quite a lot of board games out these days that are, you're building a city in the past, or you're building, you have aliens and you're building spaceships in the future.
Right.
But this one, I wanted a
Fending
game
off against zombies or
Oh yeah, and
that's a big
zombies.
one.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted a game that people could see themselves in, a game that people could relate to.
Yeah.
And so to do that, I had to do plenty of research to make it feel correct.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to win the game as a group, you have to convince the UN to pass a resolution to save the tigers. And so during the game, you're putting influence on these different UN ambassadors. And that's one of the actions that you can do is putting the influence out.
Yeah. Cool.
So why this theme, or why the endangered species thing? Like, was that something that was kind of already sort of near and dear to you, or has that developed maybe now after making the game, or where'd that come from?
Yeah, so the environment has always been a passion of mine, and it's something that I've been trying to teach my son. He's really into recycling and cleaning up. Every so often, we'll be walking down the street, and he'll just pick up trash off the street, and we're like,
"Wow,
what are you doing?" But yeah,
how old is your son?
He is 7 years old. Yeah, the environment has always been a passion of mine, and so when I decided that I'm going to do a cooperative game, I need a theme. I need something that people can relate to. This was just a perfect marriage of, my game design passion and my environmental passion. So I have been designing games for 7 years. And during that whole time, I was like, I don't want to do a cooperative game. I just did competitive games for 7 years. Yeah. Sorry, I've been designing for 10 years. So I've been working on this game for 3 years, but I should have done a cooperative game a lot sooner, it looks like.
Yeah. It's really different. Are you generally like pretty competitive in games, or?
I like all kinds of games. I am very competitive, but I like to work with people. I really am into Euro style games these days. Those kinds of games, you actually get rewarded for helping each other sometimes.
And that's another. I'm just start thinking about, because of Chris's question earlier about what is a worker placement game. I'm realizing like there's probably a decent amount of people that listen to this who don't know what these terms are. So what do we mean when we say Euro game?
Yeah. So earlier you guys were talking about, Monopoly and Risk and Sorry. Those are American style games that, there's
which sometimes board gamers call them like the snooty board gamers, at least. Or maybe all board gamers, I don't know. They call them Ameritrash.
Ameritrash games, yeah.
So, which is, I guess, I don't see how you could read that as anything other than derogatory. Yeah. Although there are some great, like, quote unquote, Ameritrash games out there.
There are, yeah. But a European style game, those games are a little bit different. There's less luck involved. All the players are involved right up until the end of the game. It can be very difficult to know who's going to win until the very end of the game. And so it makes it a little bit more exciting. The components are always a lot nicer. Your box doesn't fall apart like, old Monopoly boxes did.
Yeah.
And they're also usually a little bit shorter. Games run maybe anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours. Versus, game of Risk could take who knows how long.
Those Monopoly games where like somebody has just enough property of Monopoly to not be completely like blood dry, but you keep playing until they are completely blood dry.
Yeah.
Those were the worst.
Yeah. So
it's like, just put me out of my misery.
No, for sure. Yeah. So some popular Euro games these days are things like Ticket to Ride, Dominion, things like that. So, but cooperative games are also really popular these days. So Pandemic, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you play, is there like a cooperative game you played that you really dig that kind of like made you go, I think I want to try my hand at this?
There was, yeah. So I've loved cooperative games for a long time now, but I knew how much balance and how much work they take. And so that's why I hadn't designed one right away. But when I played Sentinels of the Multiverse,
my
that game
man,
has very little balance, but I love that game. I love that game so much.
True. Okay,
but it's
Joe,
very unbalanced.
Here's the thing: this is hilarious because Drew's gonna hate this, but like literally the guest that we just had on last week,
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Webb, he also brought up Sentinels in the Multiverse. I'm a huge Sentinels fan.
Great.
Like it was one of my first co-op games, and like I was just super into it. So like me and Eddie spent a good amount of time just geeking out about it, and Drew just had to sit there silently because he doesn't really play it or know much about it.
Have you played it, Drew?
And here we are again.
I've played it once.
Okay.
And we were talking about this with Eddie. I think I probably fell asleep during it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's a bad game. We talked about this earlier, so I won't rehash it. But it's a problem I have. When I go visit Chris, it's a 2-hour time difference because I live in Central Time Zone. He lives in Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a 2-hour time difference. I usually get there late, and then we play a game, and I'll fall asleep.
So.
Yeah, that one's a tough one to play
tired.
when you're sleepy. There's a lot going on, a lot of crazy things.
Yeah, you almost need like a minor math degree to play that game.
Yeah. So, and I do have a math degree.
Anyway,
so
sorry, Sentinels.
Yeah. So
great.
So when I played Sentinels, I was like, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoy this, but it's clear that it's not entirely balanced. So maybe I could put together a cooperative game. And so I decided to try my hand at one. And then since I have worked very hard to make sure that my game is balanced, make sure that the game comes down to a very tight finish at the end. I won't say that I fixed Sentinels, but I noticed some of the problems compared to other cooperative games that people play. And so I said, what, I like this piece, I don't like this piece, and kind of incorporated those.
I don't envy that process because like you kind of said this, but for me, the best co-op games are the ones that come down to the wire at the end, right? And it's like, just to a hair's breadth. And like, I can't imagine what it takes to design for that, for those kinds of moments and the precision required and the amount of play testing required.
Yeah, because with
to get to that
competitive game, if one player is starting to get a lead, you can usually rely a little bit on the other players to, not just let them win. Not always, but as a designer, you can rely a little bit on your players. But when you're designing a cooperative game, everyone's working together. And so you, the designer, the game, have to provide that balance.
I'm curious because I do enjoy, like, some friends of ours who played through the first season of Pandemic Legacy. We're actually not finished, but I don't know if we ever will because they moved. And they owned it.
Probably not, yeah.
But they actually came and visited us maybe a month ago, and they brought it. They're like, we have to get a couple games in. So I have hope that we will eventually get through it, but it'll just take a while. But so one of the things that's great about cooperative games is that you're all playing together, you're all working together. There's teamwork that comes in there, and strategizing together. But I think there are people that sometimes just check out in that kind of environment because they don't know the game as well, and so they just like, all right, we'll let you do the strategy. Just tell me what to do. I'm curious if people call that quarterbacking. There's one person that kind of takes over. I'm curious if you've done anything to like try to combat that problem that sometimes creeps up.
Yeah,
play cooperative games. I know you can't completely.
There are some cooperative games that do a good job of completely eliminating that quarterbacking issue, that alpha player issue. But yeah, it's not fun to play a game where one person is just telling you what to do and you're not making any choices. But anyone that makes a cooperative game has to decide how they want to address that. And some games do a really good job at addressing it. Some games like Pandemic just completely ignore it. And there's different variations in between.
What games do you think do a good job?
I think Hanabi does a really good job at that because the rules indicate that you're only allowed to give certain pieces of information. So you have hidden information in that game. There are games where you're not allowed to talk. There's no communication. So Magic Maze, I really love Magic Maze.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
There's also games where you can quarterback and you can be that alpha player, but there's it's a real time game, so you don't have time to do it. Um,
Oh yeah.
but
Space
so
alert.
those are games that really address it very well. But then there are games like Pandemic and other cooperative games where uh, that player can exist. And a lot of cooperative designers just say, you know what, just don't play with that player. It's kind of like if you play a competitive game and you play with someone who is not trying to win, they just want to screw everyone over. That's not something you want
Right. Yeah.
to play with.
So basically, you're telling me just don't play cooperative games with Chris.
Wah, wah. Hey,
Well,
hey,
but
I've been working really hard, okay, and I'm doing much better.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that.
So we actually played Endangered with Chris Bedell, the designer of Sentinels of the Multiverse, and
right.
Cool.
he gave some good feedback. He said that you can address that alpha player quarterbacking issue without actually eliminating it completely. And one of the things you can do is you can give all of your players a role. Each player plays a specific character that's good at certain things. So in my game previously, all the players played as basically the same person. They were the same average Joe guy. Now you can play as the zoologist, and he's really good at dealing with the animals. You can play as the lobbyist, who's really good at influencing the UN ambassadors. You can play as the philanthropist, who gets lots of money. And so once you know your role, you don't end up getting quarterbacked as much, because even if you're not totally familiar with the game, you're like, okay, I'm the philanthropist. I know I should be getting money. How do I get money? And also in this game, you have lots of different actions available to you, but as they get blocked, it really boils down to 3 or 4 different actions that you're deciding between. And so instead of a situation where you have so many options, it's hard as a new player to know what to do. Really, it comes down to, should I do this, guys, or should I do one of these other 2 things? And so you don't end up with a situation where there's too many decisions for a new player.
This idea of like quarterbacking or like alpha gamer, like we haven't really maybe explained it clearly, but it's basically like just the one person, maybe it's, Chris, just really knows the game well or whatever, just kind of takes over and tells people what to do. So it just kind of sucks the fun out of the game.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But it's an interesting concept because it's a player problem, really. Like it's not I guess at its root, it's not like a game design problem, I don't think. Because like there's certain groups of players that will never experience that because they don't have those kinds of players. Right. But you do hear about this, people bring it up all the time in board game circles like it's the game's problem. But I don't know that it is. I think it's the player's problem. But it puts game designers in an interesting position because then you kind of get this target painted on you like, oh, your game sucks because it allows for quarterbacking. But really it's like, no, your players suck because they quarterback. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Everyone wants to win, and so if you have a player who totally understands the game and they want to do, they think that this is the best way to win.
Right.
As long as they are, making it a discussion and saying, hey, I think we should do this because otherwise this thing could happen, and people are like, oh yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't even think of that. That's a great interaction, but it's also very close to, I think you should do this, and everyone's like, no, I don't want to do that. Stop telling me what to do. It's a fine line, and yeah, it comes down to the players and how much they actually want to discuss with each other and actually work together and not just be told what to do. And so, but you also want your players to be involved on every turn. If it's, my turn, I don't want you guys to just check out and not pay attention to what I'm doing. I want you to contribute and say, no, don't do that. Do this thing over here. And I'll be like, oh, that's a good idea. The dice themselves even help eliminate that alpha player issue because you don't know people are going to roll on their next turn. Previously, we just had workers, and so an alpha player could plan out the next 3 or 4 turns, and that was causing issues. So now you don't know what people are going to roll, so you can really only discuss like what should we do right now.
It's interesting though, just this whole discussion, because it sort of reveals how much, and this is true of game design across the board: video games, board games, playground games. But like good game design requires some effort to think about like human psychology and like human nature. How are people going to interact with these things, which I think makes the whole process really interesting. But I would be curious to hear, kind of to shift gears a little bit, like what makes you want to make board games? Like, what is it about board games that you find compelling or valuable that would make you give your time to making something that someone else can play?
Yeah, so I do play video games, but I also really like the social aspect of board gaming. I like sitting down with people and face to face being able to talk with them and experience the same thing. I mean, I still enjoy cooperative video gaming or even competitive video gaming, but these days, with it moving more toward online, where I don't see you, might not even talk to you, it's much more isolating. And so I really like sitting down at the table with everyone. And so I also, any hobby that I have, I like to also design. So when I was a kid, I used to do lots of reading, so I also did lots of writing. I am an amateur magician, so I make my own magic tricks sometimes. So once I got into board gaming, it just naturally like, oh, I want to contribute. I want to make my own thing too. So
well, we do like to get a little bit more personal on this podcast. So you talked a bit earlier about you grew up in Michigan.
Yes,
you
grew up in
said,
Michigan.
right? What part of Michigan again? You said you live in Detroit now. But
I grew up on the
again?
west side of the state, in a tiny city called Morley. I grew up on a dairy farm.
Yeah.
What part of the hand are you on? Don't people like point to a part on their hand when they're from Michigan? Because it's like shaped like a hand, right?
Correct.
Like the palm of your
so
hand.
the bottom of the ring finger.
The bottom of the ring finger. Okay, I'm looking at it right now. I look ridiculous because I'm just sitting here staring at my hand.
Yeah, you can look up Morley, Michigan, and then you'll know where it is. There you go.
And what was that like? What's that area? I assume it's fairly rural because you grew up in a dairy
it is.
farm.
It's very different from where I live now. I went to high school and graduated with 88 people. So very small school.
Wow. Yeah. And did you like help with the farm
I did.
and stuff?
Really taught me
Get up and milk cows and things. I assume you probably have like machines.
Yeah, we have machines, but even still, it's plenty of work. You still have to get up early. You still have to go out and do it. So, I helped with the dairy farm, and it definitely taught me how to work hard and how to really contribute and care for the earth. So,
did you hate that growing up, or did you? I guess you grew to like it.
There were parts that I liked, and there were parts I didn't like. I was never really interested in staying at the farm. My brother is interested in continuing farming, so he has his own farm that he's doing now. But yeah, I went to college, and I went and got a math degree, and moved on to other things.
So did you like grow up in the church or anything? Was religion a part of your upbringing at all?
I did. I grew up in a Methodist church. When I went to college, I went to the Wesley Foundation on the campus, and really met...
I used to do that too in college because they had free lunch.
Yeah.
So
free dinner.
They know how to draw in the college students.
Yeah, you could get free lunch twice a week at my school because one time was the Methodist, another one was the Baptist. So I was like, you can knock out 2 of your lunches.
Sick of eating ramen? Come have a hot lunch and find Jesus.
It was always pretty good food because they would get churches, like local churches, to sponsor the meals. And so they would bring like, I don't know if this is like, I'm stereotyping here, but a lot of times it was these like kind of older folks from the churches that would cook the meal, and so you were getting basically like grandma's home cooking for a
Oh
meal.
yeah, they were always
It was
good
great.
Yeah,
meals. Yeah,
man.
no, for sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, the Wesley Foundation was awesome. I met a lot of lifetime long friends that I'm, you know, still hang out with a couple of times a year,
that's
and play
cool.
test Endangered with them still. So
There you
they,
go.
yeah,
Nice.
no, it was good.
Cool. So is that still like? So I assume you grew up in the Methodist Church and stuff. So like, it was like you would call yourself a Christian back then. Is that still the case now?
It is still a case now. My wife and I have not found a church here in the Detroit area that we like, but we've visited a couple of them. We're still looking. But yeah,
It's hard.
yeah, it is hard.
Finding churches can be hard. Like I have sympathy for anybody who says that. Like,
Yeah, ditto.
Yeah, so when I was back in college and we were, talking about like building websites and stuff like that, I said if I ever do build a website, it's going to be called findachurch.org, and because it's a hard thing, and it's not like you can
yeah,
just go on to a search engine and be like, I want a church that meets on Sundays between these times. It's got childcare. It's contemporary or traditional. Like you can't just put those filters in somewhere
hmm
and within 20 miles of this zip code. Yeah, it's uh, it's more difficult than that. So it shouldn't be. It
yeah.
shouldn't be.
I remember when I remember when I was in. See, I actually was a pastor for a while, and when I was in seminary and learning to be a pastor, that's when you know everything and stuff. You're just like really smart and you know all the stuff about how church would work and everything. Like that whole idea was really offensive to me, of like people shopping for churches. It's like the church is the body of Christ, and like and I was like real uppity about it, and like
Yeah.
you shouldn't look for a church that fits, checks all these boxes for you. You should just like go to church and give yourself to serve the body. But now that like I have 3 kids and like I've chilled out a little bit, I'm like, man, I wish that sort of website
Yeah,
would really be
right?
nice.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
No, I follow you.
It's hard. Like we went through, my wife and I went through we had like a year and a half where we were looking around at different churches, and like part of the weirdness, I mean, I guess it depends on what you're looking for, the kind of involvement or engagement that you want from a church. But for us, it's like we're like looking for a new family.
Correct.
Like, how do you do that? How do you even begin to suss that out? So yeah, it was a drag. Ugh.
Yeah, for us, like we, having been a pastor before we came to Nashville, we live in Nashville now, and having been a pastor, like my church was my family at the church we were at previously to coming here.
Yeah,
and it was like everybody, like all my best friends went to our church, and so that was where I had like people I hung out with, people I played board games with, people, and so now that we're like visiting a new church and stuff, and like the process of finding a new church has taken a while for us, and it's been sort of like challenging in different ways for us. And so because of that, like we've figured out ways to have like good friendships outside the church, and like we've developed some community outside the church. And so now we're in this weird situation where we found a church that we like, we've been visiting, but it's like it feels almost like it's threatening what we've built since then.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if we get super plugged in, I feel like I'm paying more than I probably should. Somebody's gonna listen to this and, anyway. But it's like not that anyone at this new church is doing anything wrong. I mean, they're just,
You only have so much time.
just
Yeah.
like you only have so much time, and it's like we have good like friends, even like good Christian friends and stuff that are not a part of our church, and so like anyway, it's just hard. It's weird.
Yeah. It's one of the things I like the least about the kind of day and age that we live in, like the information digital age, where like everything is so accessible and we are so accessible that it
Yeah.
puts this undue, unnecessary amount of like pressure and guilt on us to like do all the things, connect to all the peoples all the times. You know, like I was just having this conversation the other day with somebody about like, you know, Facebook, and you know, you've got 1,000 friends on there or whatever, and like all these people that are in your news feed. Like I go through this purge every now and then where I just unfollow people that like aren't in my life anymore. You
Yeah.
know, like I'm sorry, I don't need to see what somebody
Yeah.
I had a class with in high school ate for lunch. I don't,
Sure.
it's not because I hate them. It's because like I've got enough, like I have enough people and enough things going on that that's just one
Yeah.
unnecessary thing. And I guess that it's kind of what I hear you saying about like, man, we feel like obligated, like, oh, we've got to connect to all these people, or oh, we got to connect to these people. Like, it's hard to find where those boundaries are, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
Definitely. Social media is a double-edged sword because you find yourself, you know, using all of your time on the computer looking at these things and not actually being face to face and having conversations with people that way. But it has
Mhm.
made things a lot easier to connect people to. I definitely know that
Yeah.
the board game industry would not be as big as it is now without social media. Um,
Oh, for
my
sure.
Kickstarter for Endangered is pretty much run off of social media because these days you don't see
Yeah.
board game commercials anymore. Like, you know, you don't turn on the TV and see commercials for these things. It's all, oh, someone told me
Oh,
about
that's interesting. I've
yeah,
never really
someone
thought
told me
about
about
that.
this
Yeah.
game. Well, where did they tell you? Well, they told you on social media usually, or you went over to their house and they owned it, and you're like, oh, it was fun. But but yeah, I know where you're coming from. I am not super into social media. I am on Twitter mostly just because I have to be. That's what all the board game designers are on.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
so
know.
Yeah.
if you wanted to,
I should do
Yep.
it too. Like you'll hear it today. We end like every episode with Drew. Drew shares his Twitter, and then he's like, and Chris doesn't have a Twitter. Cause I'm like, dude, Facebook's
yeah, it
enough. Like
takes too
just
much
to have to
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
deal with that. I'm like, who?
Yeah. I posted this poll recently on Facebook, of all places, asking people whether or not I should have an Instagram account. I just never. I actually had one, but I didn't realize it. You know, I like signed up for it
Yeah,
and then
that's
never
like asking,
used
should I
it
have a
ever.
car
Yeah.
that I never
Um,
drive? Sure.
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and everyone's like, yeah. I mean, like it was like 75 or 80% or something said I should have one. So I got one. I don't use it a ton, but just like post pictures of my kids and like stuff that we do as a family.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but it was sort of stressful to me to even think about getting one just because I'm like, that's another like social media thing to
Mm-hmm.
manage, and I already like sort of hate how my mind is trying to like in dull moments of the day to just pick up my phone. I can't like sit with my thoughts anymore. Like it feels like impossible
Yeah.
to do that anymore. And I know it like I know it takes it. I know it's taking away from like my relationship with my kids. So anyway,
Well,
I don't know the answer.
I think I voted no on that, so
Did you?
you should have listened to me.
I should have.
Hey, Joe, I'm curious, kind of getting back to some of your story. Like when you were growing up, Methodist, and I think you said around high school you kind of started getting into video games. Like, was that ever a point of tension, the whole gaming? Because I don't know how old you are or what era you were growing up in, but obviously, like we talk to a lot of Christians, being Christians ourselves, we know like how there can be this contentious, you know, thing between like, oh, you can't play video games and be a Christian or whatever. Was that ever a
Yeah,
thing?
my mom did not want me spending a ton of time on video games or TV or anything like that. So it was my dad that bought the first gaming system, um, and I feel like through high school and college, uh, I played it a reasonable amount, but I could definitely see how people can go overboard with those kinds of games. Um, these days, video game designers like specifically try to make the game as addictive as possible, um, which
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, you're trying to make something that's fun, but as long as the players are still playing it in moderation, it's fine. But yeah, I haven't introduced my son to like first person shooters or anything like that yet, but we still play video games. We play we play Mario and stuff. So
I wonder, I've never thought about this, but as you were talking about video games, like, are legacy games the equivalent of like loot boxes or, that kind of stuff? Like I'm trying to think of like, what's the board game equivalent, and it feels like maybe it's legacy games because it gives you that. I mean, for me at least, like me and a group of friends played through Gloomhaven this last year. And we, like, for a full year, once a week, played Gloomhaven. And after that year, we got to the point where we had unlocked everything and basically immediately stopped playing. There was still more game, like there's more scenarios we could have done, but we'd already opened everything. And so we're like, oh, what's the point?
But that's like such a smaller level than like the way loot boxes work and like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Overwatch
for any game,
something.
As a designer, you need to be paying attention to replayability. You need to be paying attention to, I don't want to put a game on the table that people are going to play one time and say, oh, that was fun, and then move on. The best is when you have your players say, oh, that was fun. Let's do it again. Let's play it again. And so getting to that point, it's difficult. And the real thing that drives people to enjoy a game and get into it is those experiences those memorable experiences where they connect to the game. So I tried to Endangered, for example, is a very emotional game. During the game, sometimes animals will have to be removed from the board. They get they get killed by poachers or whatever, and people are like, no. And those situations are very memorable where everyone is like, no. Or when you win together, you're like, everyone's very excited and they celebrate.
Do people name the animals?
I have had people. Have you
ever had any players do that?
They named one of the sea turtles Fred, and Fred was swimming along, and they eventually Fred got killed, and they're like, no, we need a new Fred, so they renamed another one Fred too.
Oh.
Maybe that's why you should just put that in the rule book. Like, don't name the animals if you don't want PTSD from this game. So it
could be good though too for some
interesting,
people, like to add a little bit of weight.
Interesting sidebar. Well, maybe it's interesting to me. My wife and I went to this. What was it called? The Marine Mammal Care Center down in San Pedro. Here in California, and it's basically where they find like sea lions and seals, and they rehabilitate them and they release them back out into the wild. And I never thought about this. They don't name any of them. They give them numbers, and the reason they don't name them is because they also like limit their human interaction because they want them to stay as wild animals. And so they don't name them so that none of them like form attachments, that visitors don't form attachments. Like when they go to feed them or whatever, they like keep their distance. They even put these like big wooden planks in front of them so like they can't touch them or anything like that. It was super interesting. I never really thought about that. So
with any game, whether it's a video game or a board game, you want your players to have an experience that they are going to remember and they're going to want to talk about. And so I've actually played Endangered with Rob Daviau, the designer for Pandemic Legacy, and he said, some designers will some designers will design around the theme first. Some designers will design around a mechanic first. Rob likes to design around the experience first. What does he want his players to feel? What does he want his players to experience? And so when he was designing Pandemic Legacy, he was like, I want people to be like, oh my God, open this new box. It's a new thing.
It stresses me out. Pandemic Legacy opening up the new box because it's never good.
But it's memorable, right? It's memorable.
In that game.
It is memorable.
I guess that's good. I mean, this is coming from the person who loves Dark Souls games, so those are all about stress.
Basically, you
don't
hate
want
yourself.
The game to be too easy.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear because you talked about how you grew up in the faith, and that's been an important part of your life, and grew up in the church, in a Christian church, and was an important part of life in college and stuff. Does that, like, your faith perspective inform your game design in any way? Like, has that, do you design a certain way because of your faith?
So
Do you have any sense of that?
definitely, I've mentioned this already that I like games where you help each other, whether it's a cooperative game or even in a competitive game. I like Euro games where you're not trying to screw over everyone else. You actually sometimes get rewarded for helping each other. Um, but even so,
Yeah.
as far as my game design, like in terms of theme, I would say that my faith has not helped a lot. Like, so I would say yes on on the side of mechanics, but on the side of theme, not so much. You don't see a lot of Christian or religious games. It's very niche and sometimes a touchy subject, and so someone
Mm-hmm.
who is not part of that
Sure.
belief might not be as interested in buying into that theme. It might be a great game. It might be the mechanics might be amazing, but the theme, not so
Yeah.
much.
Well, I think there is a connection between your theme and your faith. I mean, you kind of touched on it briefly earlier, but and sadly, this is like a thing that a lot of Christians today, we're not a lot. Well, yeah, probably a lot if we're honest. That have this sort of attitude about the environment. It's like, well, Jesus is coming back, so so
Yeah.
so who cares about the animals or oil or whatever. But like I do think there's a case. In fact, it's something I believe pretty strongly in, that like a Christian quote unquote worldview should motivate you to be very like mindful of our planet and very like have a conservationist approach that wants to preserve this place and take care of it really well because it's a gift, and it's a gift that we can mess up, and we have as human beings. Obviously, I think messed it up pretty bad. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that
absolutely.
theme in your game a lot.
Yeah, we are stewards of this world, so I agree. We should be driven to not only help the environment as it is now, but that helps our, you know, that helps everyone else, that helps humanity, that helps our future generations. So I find it very important, and I find it often strange that there are Christians that have that view that you mentioned, where no, we don't need to worry about the environment, and I think part of it comes down to political divide these days. Um, these days
Mm-hmm.
there's people on the left and there are people on the right, and their views on many different topics, um, there's views on many different topics for people that are Democratic or Republican. And what's weird to me is that if you want to call yourself a Republican or call yourself a Democrat, that you have to agree with all of them then. So if you want to be a Republican, then okay, then
Yeah.
that
Right.
means you're very
Yeah.
religious, and
That's
that means
frustrating.
that you agree
Yeah.
with the NRA and allowing guns, and it means you agree with big companies and you're not worried about the environment. And I'm like, why do those all fit together? Like, I consider myself,
Yeah.
Right.
religious. I consider myself a Christian, but I also believe that we should be working toward helping the environment. So am I allowed to believe
Yeah.
something from both the left and the right? Like, it's very strange to me that these days that it's so polarized. Uh, yeah,
Yeah. It's dangerous. That sort of thinking is really dangerous. Like,
Yeah.
you either have to get on board with all of our agenda
yeah,
or none of it, or you can't be in the club or whatever, Like, that's really encourages
yeah,
people not to think for themselves, encourages people not to like want their
yeah,
ideas and their positions to be improved by the people around them. Like, we ought to have this attitude about like, hey, help me be a better in my views of the environment or whatever. Help me understand more and know more. And it's sad as a culture that we're sort of like just signing off on like, tell me what to believe and let's sign off on everything or none of it.
yeah. President Obama brought this up in his Audacity of Hope book, that, yeah, it's so polarized these days. And part of that came about from the 2000 election, which was so close that people kind of were forced to pick a side on everything, and that we're still seeing that today. Like, I agree with a lot of what President Obama did, but there are things that President Trump is doing good. Except you can't say that unless you agree with everything. It's either you agree with everything that
or
he's
nothing,
doing
man.
or nothing,
Yeah.
and I don't get that. Like,
Right.
I think that he's a businessman. He knows the economy really well. I think that he's going to do a good job with the economy. But then there are things that I don't like. But I can't. But what's weird is that I can't say that. I can't say I agree with one thing or disagree with one thing without everyone saying, okay, that means you agree with all of it or you disagree with all of it.
Right. Yeah.
It's just so crazy.
Yeah. People are complicated.
Yeah.
And ideas are complicated and deserve nuance and nuanced discussion. And
I think
it's sad that discourse on these things is
this is a whole other podcast episode
is.
probably, but like,
yeah.
dude, I think the struggle here is this movement that's happening. It's probably already happened, but I think we're still feeling the aftershocks maybe from like modern thinking to postmodern thinking. Like where modern thinking is like, and even I think this is, we feel this in like Christian circles, but even society at large, where it's like things are black and white. There's truth and there's not. And truth is not something that's subjective. It's not something that's like, oh, what's your truth? It's like, this is the truth. And that's that modern way of thinking. And now we've moved into this age where it's like, Burger King, have it your way, which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. There can be bad parts of it, but it's the gray area, right? Like we're trying to live in this gray area because we realize how complicated and complex our brains are and our society and culture is, that we know there's just not always, if ever, black and white answers to things, or, all or nothing kind of extreme approaches like, oh, you're either right wing or you're left wing. And I think we feel that everywhere, this shift from that modern to postmodern kind of stuff.
There's hope, at least, I think, maybe that we'll realize how unhealthy that is. I think people already in our day and age, like, I have, there's so many things I feel like I can't talk about publicly. I think we all feel that way, to some degree. But, I have these friends that I can't. Like Chris is one of those people for me. Like, if I can talk to him about stuff, and he's not going to be like, "Oh, you're an idiot."
I thought you were going to say I was one of the ones that you can't talk to things.
Oh, no. Like, I feel like there's no subject I can't broach that.
Yeah.
That I'm going to be shunned for.
It's because I live in California and I'm a hippie.
So I think
like, whatever, bro, go surfing.
That's right. Yeah. So like we're culturally, I think people are finding that personally in their friends and things, and eventually hopefully maybe we'll realize how that's unhealthy for us, like on a bigger scale. But anyway, we can't fix that problem now, but what we can do is tell people to go check out Endangered.
Yes.
Please do.
That's a step in the right direction.
Agree with the theme or not, it's a fun game. So
yeah.
Oh, something I wanted to mention, because I saw this on your Kickstarter page. I don't know if you have anything to say about it, but you have some kind of partnership with the Center for Biological Diversity.
That's right. So we are partnered with the Center for Biological Diversity. On the Kickstarter page, one of our pledge levels, you can buy a copy of the game, and then for another $20, we will donate a copy of the game to the Center for Biological Diversity, and they will send it to an educational group or a school. We don't make any money on those second copies. Those are just a donation. So we also, we also raised money for every thumbs up that we get on Board Game Geek. We're going to contribute $1 to the Center for Biological Diversity. The publisher is. And then, they've actually played the game and really enjoyed it. And we're going to make sure that whatever content and whatever scenarios we put in there, that they play it and we get there. Okay. That yes, what we're doing in this makes sense. It's connected to, what we actually do as conservationists. We don't want to put stuff in there that's like, something like where we're naming the animals, right? We don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to
Yeah.
make sure that they're checking all of our, checking our work.
So by the time this comes out, your Kickstarter will have about 15 or 16 days to go.
April 26th.
And so, yeah. So, and you've not yet met your goal. So if you're listening to this and this sounds rad to you, like go. I mean, by the time this comes out, you may have met your goal. But,
yeah, it's super close.
Yeah, we're close.
But
we have a couple of stretch goals that we're still working on. There's we're hoping that we get to hit some of those awesome stretch goals. So
people just search for Endangered, I guess is the best way to find it. Search for Endangered
Kickstarter.
on
Yep, Endangered Kickstarter. If you search for Endangered Kickstarter, you can also go to the Grand Gamers Guild website. The publisher is Grand Gamers Guild.
GrandGamersGuild.com.
And then, or you can just look for the box with the tiger on it. Beth Sobel did our art. Beth Sobel and Ben Flores, they did an amazing job. Yeah,
it looks great.
It does look great. It's super just bright, and I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kickstarter's got a couple weeks left on it. When do you hope to have it in people's hands?
So March 2020 is the the long-term goal. So we're definitely going to have it to people by then. But it should be here before then. We're having it printed and shipped over here, so it should be here in the U.S. by November 2019. But
cool.
Don't quote me on that. It might be till March. Any Kickstarter, you do it and then you can actually start, producing the game. But we made sure that all the content is done, all the art is done, all the graphic design is done. So it's not going to be super long. The game is basically, did we fund? Yes. All right. Get it printed.
And you said earlier you're on Twitter?
I'm at Average Joe Games. That's AVG Joe Games. You can also email me at joehopkinsgames@gmail.com if you want to talk about Endangered, you want to talk about game design, whatever.
Cool. Nice, cool. Any chance you're going to be at Gen Con?
I am going to be at Origins this year. Yep, I'll be there.
We'll see you there, dude.
I'll probably be hanging out at the Grand Gamers Guild area or the Grand Gamers Academy area. As far as Gen Con, I'm going to Gen Can't this year. So.
I hear you. Yeah. Sometimes you got to. So.
Hey, are you gonna try to demo Endangered?
Yes, we've got several blocks set up for Endangered. So if you just search on Endangered, we're gonna be the only ones demoing it. So it won't be printed by then, but you can come and take a look at the prototype version. You can come take a look at the preview copy. And that'll have all the finalized art and everything. So.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, we'll have to talk because Drew and I will be there.
All right. We'll see you there.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll come play. Well, thanks so much for coming on. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm DrewDixon82. Chris is working or debating about whether or not to resurrect his Twitter account.
I have one. I just don't do anything with it.
He does not really advertise it because he doesn't post anything. You can follow us on Twitter. At Love Thy Nerd. You can follow us on Facebook as well. Actually, like us on Facebook. Just search for Love Thy Nerd. And while you're doing that, request to join our community. And upon discovering that you're not a robot, we'll let you join the Love Thy Nerd community. Just search for Love Thy Nerd community on Facebook. You'll find it, and you can go talk about nerd stuff with other nerds, and it'll be really nerdy and great. And we have a great website, lovethynerd.com, with all kinds of articles that help you understand the value and potential of nerd culture, as well as we'll do, features on video games, board games, all kinds of things. So if you want to learn about this medium and learn about why it's so great, but various mediums in nerd culture, go check that out. We have a whole podcast network. Free Play and The Pull List are our other two podcasts. Definitely go give both of those a listen. Go review all of our podcasts on iTunes. Go ahead and click 5 stars if you're just thinking about it and you're like, what number value should I choose in my review? Do 5. That's what I recommend. And you can email me, Drew, at lovethynerd.com. If you want to ask any questions about the podcast or anything like that, feel free to reach out to us.